Natural human tendency in a postmodern age. We all want to see the big picture at a glance, to reach down and feel for ourselves the dark glowing embers left behind by the firestorm called history. In the secret history of our life and times, how many nights are there like that humid Arkansas August midnight in 1987, where two unfortunate high school seniors looking for a little adventure got more than any teenager ever should bargain for?
In August 1987, my son Kevin had spent the night with his friend Don Henry. And Don's dad had allowed them to go out hunting after they arrived home. They left Don's home that night around 12:30 a.m. The next thing we knew, we'd been told that they'd been run over by a train.
More than once in our conversations with Mrs. Ives, we heard matter-of-fact testimony from her about events she has been forced to live through that verged on the surreal. I mean, how many parents have any expectation that their child will be killed by a train?
The explanation that the medical examiner had 3 weeks after the deaths was that they had smoked massive amounts of marijuana, had simply fallen asleep on the tracks and didn't hear the train coming. But one of the things that we did know was that they were lying in identical positions across the tracks, side by side, soldier style almost. If they were so stoned out of their minds, why were they lying in identical positions? We were also beginning to hear rumors about the appearance of the boy's blood and the fact that there was very little blood. A friend of mine's friend worked with the emergency medical team that was from Saline Memorial Hospital who responded to the scene that night, and she began telling us that they were saying that the appearance of the blood wasn't right, that the dark tar-like appearance of the blood indicated to them that the boys may have been dead for some time.
And then there was the tarp.
We also had begun hearing rumors of a tarp covering the boys. We questioned the authorities about it and were told that it was simply an optical illusion. My husband Larry has been a locomotive engineer for over 30 years, and certainly his experience was that 3 men in the cab of a train sitting in different positions didn't ordinarily see optical illusions.
Grief overcame doubt for the families at first.
You know, at that point in time, we didn't have any reason to believe anybody was lying to us or anything else, or that, you know, there was, anything there being covered up. We just had a lot of questions that they couldn't seem to answer, and we wanted a second opinion.
But the inconsistencies about the circumstances surrounding the boy's death kept nagging Linda.
It wasn't until sometime later that we actually talked directly to the crew. That crew, as a matter of fact, was very well known to my husband Larry and had worked with him for years. They basically told him that they were absolutely certain that they had seen a green tarp covering the boys, and were in fact able to describe it in detail, and also, as I said, they located the tarp after impact and showed it to one of the deputies.
Small towns in Arkansas are apparently not all like Andy Griffith's Mayberry.
There were suspicions immediately in the community. We were hearing things from Kevin's friends, things from people who knew somebody had been at the scene, and the very first thing that we heard that day when I was called to Don Henry's house was from Mr. Henry. He had been told by a local resident that they'd been shot and tied to the tracks and run over by a train. We were assured immediately by Saline County that that was not the case and that there was no indication of foul play. But that was the very first thing we were told. The rumors flew fast and furious, and it was a very short period of time when we began hearing things about drugs, drop sites and drops from trains.
And that's what makes this story different from any we had ever heard. Because as we sat there listening, we began to hear a tale that told of how in the 1980s drugs rained from the sky regularly onto the native soil of the sovereign state of Arkansas. When we come back, we'll hear the amazing story that changed Linda Ives' ideas about what is commonly referred to as our drug problem.
When a citizen and a parent like myself thinks of the drug problem in a community the size of Bryant, you think that that problem is with the kids. You never think that it's with law enforcement or with public officials.
It's a little cruel to say about somebody's personal tragedy, but the train death story seems made for television, and it's been retold on a dozen different shows, like this segment from Dateline. It's got all the ingredients of a really good movie of the week. You want heartrending? Get out your handkerchiefs.
It was just a hot August summer night. Kevin and Don had been out. They had not returned to Don's house. Something was wrong. I called his daddy, and he said, "What is it?" I said, "I think he's dead."
But it's also a story of suspense and intrigue and a political potboiler to boot. The first big question most news magazine shows asked was this: what is this man, former Arkansas coroner Fahmy Malek, covering up?
Dr. Malek refused repeated requests to talk with us. But when we caught up with him, he said people didn't like him because he's from Egypt. And he claimed he had never made a single mistake in any of the 7,000 autopsies he conducted.
People say that as the state medical examiner, you were incompetent and you bungled cases, and that Governor Clinton, for some reason, defended you and protected you. Is that the case?
You have to understand that I did 7,000 autopsies. Not one single case overturned because of me.
Not a single case?
Not one single case.
But that's just not true.
About a week after the boys were killed, we were told that the crime lab had found traces of marijuana in their system, and that the medical examiner was probably going to rule the death suicide. And we told the law enforcement officer that told us that we would never, ever accept a suicide ruling. And we learned in grand jury testimony later on that when the medical examiner, Fahmy Malek, called Jim Steed, our sheriff, and told him he was ruling double suicide, he told him, "You can't do that. The family will never accept suicide." And basically what they did was go along with an accidental ruling, and those traces of marijuana became massive amounts of marijuana.
Dateline's answer that Clinton was repaying a past favor from Malek was wrong, because now we've already got the sheriff lying too, and we're barely into round one.
We have learned that Saline County Sheriff's Office lied to us on a number of occasions. They lied about having tested for fibers of the tarp on the boys' clothing, and told us that that was the basis of knowing that the tarp was an optical illusion, when in fact they had never tested their clothing.
10 years later, Malek is most interesting because he was so protected.
The medical examiner comes up and he has fabrication to where he has created his own evidence.
This is of a magnitude it could create a national scandal, and if necessary, it will.
I have work to do.
We began trying to obtain a second opinion on our own, basically. We ran into brick walls everywhere we turned. We got absolutely no cooperation whatsoever from local or state officials. Little Rock Crime Lab defied a court order to supply the things that we were requesting in order to get a second opinion. Saline Memorial Hospital also defied a court order. I called the State Attorney General's office and asked what recourse we had, and I was told that basically I had none, that as their legal counsel, they would strongly urge the Little Rock Crime Lab to comply with our court order, but if they didn't, there wasn't anything they could do about it.
You know me.
I have work to do.
Excuse me, please. You can say that you are honest.
If I'm going to run a state any way I want